Thanks again for joining us tonight. This is the third in our four-part mini-series about financial aid. I'm so excited that you're here tonight. Our first two sessions, the first was on FAFSA, the second was on the CSS profile. Both of them are archived on our website, so I encourage you to check those out. If you have time in the future, if you want to refer back to those, they're archived on our website. A few housekeeping notes about tonight. First, please put your questions in the Q&A box. We'll answer that either as we're going along or when we get to the end. And closed captioning is available. The CC button is at the bottom of your screen. Without any further delay, let's get into it. I'm so excited to learn about all the options for about paying for college. Ben Parsons is with us tonight from the Office of Financial Aid. And I know you're going to learn a lot tonight. I'm going to learn a lot tonight. So Ben, let's get started.
Thank you, Drew, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Ben Parsons. I work in the financial aid office, and I am happy to talk with everyone tonight about paying for college. Paying for college can be compared to putting together a jigsaw puzzle without having the box top. Where there are a lot of different, very disparate pieces, and you're not really sure how they fit together. So hopefully after tonight, you will have a little better idea of how to actually pay for college. So to that end, tonight, we will talk about the different types of financial aid. We will talk about scholarships, which I am sure that a lot of you are very curious about. We will talk about the different options and methods for actually paying the bill, so the cost left over after financial aid. We will go over some resources and just some things to keep in mind as you are entering this college and financial aid application season. And then lastly, we will leave some time at the end for your questions. So when we're talking about types of financial aid, there are two broad categories: gift aid and self-help aid. And with gift aid, there are two types of financial aid that fall within that category. And the first is scholarships. So scholarships are free money that is given to a student for a certain desirable attribute. So maybe it's good grades, maybe it's athletes, maybe it's playing a musical instrument. Whatever it is, scholarships are free money that does not have to be paid back after graduation. The second type of gift aid is grants. So grants are a type of they're a type of free money also that does not have to be paid back. The difference between grants and scholarships, though, is that grants are awarded based on financial need, as determined by the FAFSA, sometimes by the CSS profile, and by any other institutional documentation that might be required. So that's gift aid. The second category is self-help aid. The first type of self-help aid is work study, or federal work study. And work study is a type of part-time employment where the student works a job and they are paid directly. So whereas every other type of financial aid is paid to the institution and applies directly to the bill, federal work study is paid directly to the student and is intended to help the student cover some of the living expenses that they accrue while attending college. The last form of self-help aid is loans. Now, loans are not the most desirable form of financial aid because they do have to be paid back. However, loans are often a necessary evil, if you will, and they are a form of financial aid that is available to families. So let's look a little more closely at loans. So when talking about loans, there are federal loans and private loans, and there are student loans and parent loans. So federal loans in the student's name are known as direct subsidized and direct unsubsidized loans. You might also hear them referred to as Stafford loans. Direct loans have a fixed interest rate for the life of the loan, and they do not go into repayment until 6 months after graduation. There is no no credit requirement for these loans. The only requirement for the federal loans is submitting the FAFSA every year. The federal loan that's in the parent's name is a loan called the Parent Plus loan. So this is a credit-based loan in the parent's name. It also has a fixed interest rate for the life of the loan, and there are several repayment options. The standard repayment begins 60 days after the full disbursement of the loan. So at Holy Cross, that usually translates to around end of March, beginning of April. However, repayment can be deferred until after graduation if the family wants. With private loans, these are credit-based loans that are usually in the student's name with a credit-worthy co-borrower. These are taken through private individual lenders, financial institutions. There are some lenders that offer private loans in the parent's name, but most lenders offer loans in the student's name. Interest rates and repayment terms can vary from lender to lender and are also dependent on the applicant's credit.
And can I jump in and the real
Absolutely
question? Can you this is going to be a little bit long-winded, but can you go back a slide, because I want to ask some questions about that first slide. Okay, all right. So I'm not that sophisticated, so I've got a couple questions here. Just I want to see if we can compare some terminology.
Okay.
Grants, gift
Yes.
aid, when people are talking about financial aid, do you think most commonly are they referring to grants?
Probably yes.
Okay.
So when families are reaching out to us with questions about financial aid, they are most often asking about scholarships and grants.
Yeah.
I think it is important to point out, though, that financial aid as a broad category, it does include scholarships and grants. However, federal work study and loans are also types of financial aid.
Right. And as you explained, sort of the scholarships piece and the grants piece, those were our favorite pieces because
Yes.
they were free money.
Yes.
And
yes.
And under the scholarships category, we had probably both athletic scholarships and merit scholarships and service scholarships, any sort of award for attributes of that particular applicant, right?
Right. So in high school, I played the tuba. So there might be a tuba scholarship out there. I don't know of any because there are not many tuba players. But yes, any desirable attribute can have a potential scholarship looking for someone with that attribute.
And are there times, this is again maybe a little obvious question, are there times where students receive both? They receive both grants and scholarship in their financial aid award?
Absolutely. Depending on the institution, students can absolutely have scholarships grants. So grants can come from the federal government, from the state government, from the college itself. So depending on the family's financial need, they might have scholarships, they might have federal grants, state grants, institutional grants, and they might also receive outside scholarships from third-party sources.
And sorry, last question. I know I said this was going to be quick. I was wrong. If a student's admitted and they get their financial aid award, is it possible that they get the full menu here, that they get some piece of all four of these?
Yes, it is very possible. Again, it depends on the institution. Speaking from the Holy Cross perspective, we definitely have students whose financial aid package includes some. So it might have 3 items here. It might have all 4. So it just depends.
Okay, great. Sorry, that's my last question. You can get back on track with your slideshow.
Great, thank you. So we talked about loans. So going to scholarships, what we were just talking about. Scholarships can come from the college itself. Scholarships can also come from outside organizations. So in looking for these sources of funding, I usually recommend that families start with fastweb.com. That is the most popular, the most widely used scholarship search site that we know of. In addition to FastWeb, I usually advise students to check with their high school guidance, their high school guidance office, because a lot of times the guidance office will find out about local scholarships that will not pop up in a national scholarship search. Similarly, if you search local community boards, so maybe there's a bulletin board at your local public library, maybe there's a Facebook community board, any community board where local organizations can post scholarships that they are sponsoring. Keep an eye on those, especially during February to April-ish. Wherever you search for this funding, it is important that you apply early and apply often. I recommend just applying for as many scholarships as possible, because every little bit helps. Even if you get a $200 award, that is $200 that you do not then have to pay out of pocket or borrow later on. It is important, though, to be careful, but because there are certainly scholarship scams. If a website, if an organization, if a person is charging you money to go out and find scholarships, that is almost certainly a scam. Scholarships are free money, and you should not be paying money to receive that money.
And I jump in with a quick question, because we got a great question from the great state of Texas. I see you out there, Haley. Her question was about, like, are there scholarship websites we should avoid? And you mentioned if there's ones you have to pay for. Is that what you're sort of speaking to right there?
Yes. So I do not know any. I do not know any specific ones to avoid just off the top of my head, but a good rule of thumb for avoiding certain sites is if they are charging money, because scholarships are free money. So if they're charging, run the other way. Was that the only question?
Yeah, and
there?
and
Okay.
one last one. The timing of applying for these scholarships, you mentioned starting early. Is there ever a point when it's too late to apply for scholarships?
It is truth that most organizations they award their scholarships usually between April and June. Their application window usually opens up maybe January-ish. It just depends on the organization. But that does not mean that there are not scholarships out there throughout the year. Organizations, they start ramping up their application process usually December, January, and then they're usually deciding in April or May. But I definitely recommend that families just check throughout the year, specifically because most students applying are applying between January and April, and so there is less competition for scholarships in September. Just simply because there are fewer students applying at that point. Was that it?
Yep, all set, Ben. Thanks.
Okay. So when it comes to paying the bill, so a school will send the bill, and financial aid usually covers a part, but for that remaining gap, when it comes to paying that gap, we usually recommend that families think about paying from 3 different buckets. And those buckets are past, present, and future income. So past income includes money that you have saved, maybe a 529 plan, maybe a UTMA plan or a UGMA plan. So any savings plan that you already have. Present income includes your current cash flow. So how much you can afford to pay based on your current income. And to that end, most colleges offer a monthly payment plan, which is an interest-free plan that allows families to spread out the cost over several months. So that would come out of your present income. And then future income, well, that's loans, because you are essentially borrowing future income from yourself to pay the present bill. For most families, paying that gap includes some combination of all 3 buckets. So for most families, they are not paying solely out of past income or solely out of their current cash flow, or they're not solely borrowing it, but it's some combination of those 3. And that is really where the financial aid office comes in, because we can help families find the best combination for your family, the most successful plan to really put you on the path to financial success for college, which, as everyone knows, is super expensive. So some things to keep in mind as we are entering this college and financial aid application season. The first is apply for financial aid. So complete the FAFSA, complete any necessary documents such as the CSS profile. If a college requires an institutional financial aid application separate from the CSS profile, submit that. Be cognizant of all dates. And the best suggestion that I had is figure out what date at what school is the earliest, and submit all documents to all schools by that earliest date. Because when you're talking about financial aid, deadlines matter. The second reminder is for families that are planning on borrowing. Check your credit now to resolve any unknown issues that might be there that might impact your ability to borrow when that time comes. Annualcreditreport.com is an excellent resource for this. A lot of credit card companies are they now offer credit checks also. And we talked about this earlier, but apply for as many scholarships as possible, because every little bit helps. And we have a list of resources for families. So I mentioned this one earlier. fastweb.com. That's an excellent resource. Studentaid.gov. So once the student has completed the FAFSA, they take out federal loans. They go into repayment on those loans. Studentaid.gov will become the central clearinghouse for all federal financial aid stuff. So it can be useful to become familiar with that site now. finaid.org has a lot of really good resources. I primarily use it for their loan calculators. So if you are wondering what a standard monthly payment would be on a $20,000 loan at 4.8% interest, finaid.org has calculators for that. I mentioned this earlier, but depending on the high school, your high school guidance office can often be a very useful repository for scholarships and just general application information. The last thing I will mention here is every college somewhere on their site, they must have a net price calculator, which gives you an estimate of what your financial aid eligibility might look like and what that out-of-pocket expense might be. At Holy Cross, we have two. The first one is offered through My Intuition, and the way it works is you answer, I think it's six questions, and then it gives a range of possible financial aid offers. The second option is the College Board Net Price Calculator, and that goes a lot more in depth and asks a lot more information. There are two main caveats to know about these calculators. So the first is if there was a non-custodial parent in the picture, the net price calculator is not smart enough to count that contribution, whereas in the financial aid office we do count that. The second thing is for parents that own their own business, we look at that in the financial aid office, but the net price calculator cannot consider that either. So those are two big caveats. But for most families where it is a one or two parent household with base wages, the net price calculator gives a pretty good estimate of what your financial aid eligibility might be. So that's a lot of information really fast. So I would like to open it up to any questions that you might have.
I've got lots of questions for you.
Okay.
All right, Ben, here we go. This has been voiced a few times. Well, we've heard this one before, but does a student have to reapply for scholarships each year, or is it usually a lump sum? That was a question that we had.
Okay. As with many things in financial aid, the answer is it depends. For outside scholarships, some organizations just award one-time awards. Some award recurring awards, and they might have some eligibility criteria that the student has to submit every year to receive that recurring award. For institutional merit scholarships, some colleges offer one year awards. Some colleges offer recurring awards. At Holy Cross, any scholarships that we offer, those are guaranteed for the four years. So it depends on the type of award. It depends on where it's coming from. It depends on the college.
Here's another question we got a few times. If a student receives a private or a local scholarship and reports it to the financial aid office, does that money get deducted from the package or added on?
Again, it depends. Different financial aid offices have different procedures for handling outside funding. In the here at Holy Cross, we make every attempt possible to add that outside funding on top of whatever has already been packaged. If we have to adjust the financial aid package at all, we first start with that self-help aid, so work study and loans. Once those have been exhausted, only then will we adjust any other grants or scholarships. But honestly, that happens pretty rarely.
Okay, great. Here's sort of I think this is a great question. When do students usually find out what the cost of the next year of their education will be? And let's imagine this is for students applying for their first year.
Guess what? It depends. So at Holy Cross and most other institutions that I know of, the fall bill usually goes out sometime in early July. It is usually the fireworks that go along with your July 4th celebration is that bill. So that's usually the bill for the fall term, with the due date usually around the beginning of August. The spring bill, that's usually sent out around Thanksgiving, with the due date around Christmas. So for that family, they can write the check and put a bow on it and put it under the tree. But it really just depends. What I would recommend is, as you are comparing colleges and comparing financial aid offers, talk to the financial aid office, because they should be able to estimate the out-of-pocket expense for the year. It might not be exact, but it will at least be an estimate to allow you to begin planning ahead of time.
Are there maybe this is a trick question, but are there especially, I guess, maybe on this topic about paying for college, is there like a most common mistake that you see families make?
Good question. I think one big mistake is just simply not applying for financial aid or not applying on time. A lot of families will assume that they will not qualify for financial aid, so they will not submit the necessary documents. And so we never get a chance to actually evaluate their financial aid eligibility. Even if the family does not receive any merit scholarships. They might not qualify for any need-based grants. At the very minimum, they will automatically qualify for some federal student loan funding. So I think the biggest mistake is just simply not applying or not applying on time. And I say that because resources are limited, and resources are reserved for families that actually apply on time.
This is a great question. Is financial aid awarded? Is a financial aid award impacted by whether a student applies ED or RD?
Great question. The answer is no. At Holy Cross, we meet families' full demonstrated financial need, regardless of whether students apply ED or RD. So the financial aid documentation is exactly the same: FAFSA, CSS profile, taxes, and the financial aid eligibility is also the same. We meet the family's full need regardless.
Awesome. This has been so great, Ben. This was a lot of great information, a lot of great food for thought as we think about saving in the past, our current earnings, and loans for the future. A lot of great information about applying for outside scholarships and about the impact of financial aid. Thanks so much to you for all this helpful insight.
Thank you.
Attendees and viewers, thanks so much for joining us tonight. We have one last webinar in our financial aid webinar series. It will be next Sunday. If you haven't already signed up, please sign up. The link's coming at you right now in the chat feature. Click that link, sign up for our final, that'll be our final opportunity to chat as a group here in these webinars. Again, thanks again for coming. Stay safe, stay sane, and stay in touch. Good night.